There is a particular kind of invisibility that only the most famous people in the world understand. It is not the invisibility of being overlooked. It is the invisibility of being seen too much, of being seen only as what you represent, never as who you are, of walking into a room and watching people react not to your presence, but to the idea of you, the image, the name, the brand. Jun Seo. Im had been invisible that way for 12 years. He had sold out stadiums on 4 continents. He had graced the cover of magazines in languages he couldn't read. He had answered the same interview question. What is it like to be one of the most recognized faces in Asia? So many times that he had a stock answer, a practiced smile, and a way of tilting his head that photographed beautifully and revealed absolutely nothing. He came to New York in October not to perform, not to be seen, not to be anything at all. He came because he was 31 years old, and he couldn't remember the last time he had sat in a room without an agenda. He came because his hands had started shaking before shows. He came because his manager, the only person who had known him since before the fame, had looked at him one morning and said, quietly, that he needed to disappear for a while before he disappeared for good. So he disappeared. Into the city that is the best place in the world to be no one. And then, on a Tuesday morning in October, on a sidewalk on the Upper West Side, in the rain, he ran, quite literally, into Mara Whitfield. She didn't recognize him. She didn't apologize either. What she said, after they had both stared at the scattered contents of her bag on the wet concrete, was, a simple, "Excuse me?" before you flatten someone would go a long way. He had not heard anything like that in 12 years. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprised even him. And that was how it started. Not with a song, not with a spotlight, not with a crowd chanting his name. It started with rain and a spilled bag, and a woman who looked at him like he was simply, and only, a man who had walked into her morning without permission. This is the story of what happens when the most watched person in a room finally meets someone who isn't watching. This is the story of Mara and Jun Seo, and it will surprise you. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And when you're done listening, come tell us in the comments. Have you ever met someone who saw you, really saw you, when everyone else was looking right through you? We want to hear your story. The rain had been falling since before dawn, not the dramatic, cinematic rain that turns New York into a movie, the kind that makes people look up and feel something. This was the ordinary kind, gray, persistent, indifferent, the kind of rain that had no interest in anyone's story. Jun Seo had been awake since 4 a.m, not because of jet lag. He had long since stopped feeling the difference between time zones, but because sleeping had become something he did in increments now. 2 hours here, 3 there. His body had learned to run on the minimum. He had been in the city for 3 days. His manager had booked him a sublet in a building on West 82nd Street under a name that wasn't his. A precaution that had become routine. The apartment belonged to a Kellist who was on tour in Europe. It smelled faintly of rosin and old books. And Jun Seo had spent most of his first 2 days sitting in the cellist's reading chair by the window, watching the street below, doing absolutely nothing. It felt, he thought, like breathing for the first time after being underwater for a very long time. He didn't know how long he'd been underwater. That was the thing no one told you when you signed the contract at 19. When you stepped into the practice room and gave your body and your voice and your time and your name to something larger than yourself. No one told you that the water came in slowly, that by the time you noticed you couldn't breathe, you'd been drowning for years. He put on a dark coat, a baseball cap pulled low, and went out for coffee. This was the other thing no one told you about fame, the joy of small tasks, the profound, almost embarrassing pleasure of walking to a coffee shop without a security detail, without a schedule, without someone telling you where to stand and how to smile and what not to say. He walked 3 blocks in the rain like a man who had just remembered that walking was something his legs knew how to do on their own. He was rounding the corner at 82nd and Columbus when he turned the corner without looking, and the collision was immediate and total. He felt the impact before he processed what had happened. A shoulder, a bag, a cascade of small objects onto the wet sidewalk. Keys, a slim notebook, a lip balm rolling toward the curb, a phone that landed face down with a sound that made both of them wince. He looked up. The woman standing in front of him was pulling herself to her full height, with the specific energy of someone who has been inconvenienced one time too many on this particular morning. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket that had not, based on the state of her, done its job especially well. She looked at the contents of her bag on the sidewalk. She looked at him. She looked back at the contents of her bag. "You know," she said, a simple, "Excuse me," before you flatten someone would go a long way. He blinked. In 11 years of being recognized everywhere he went, not a single person had spoken to him like that within the first 30 seconds of meeting him. Usually there was a double take. Usually there was a sharp intake of breath, a reaching for a phone, a voice that went a register higher than normal. This woman was crouching down to collect her things, and her primary emotional register appeared to be mild, principled irritation. He crouched too, automatically, reaching for the notebook, the keys. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wasn't looking." "Neither was I," she conceded, and something about the way she said it, fair and unhesitating, no performance, made the corner of his mouth pull upward. "Your phone," he said, picking it up and handing it over with the screen facing down, a small courtesy. She turned it over, assessed the crack that had appeared across the bottom corner, and exhaled through her nose with the controlled resignation of someone who has learned that some mornings are simply like this. "It's fine," she said, though her voice made clear she was still deciding whether it was fine. "I'm sorry about that," he said again, and this time he meant it with a specificity that surprised him, not the polished, managed apology he gave when things went wrong in professional contexts. A real one. She looked at him then. Actually looked, not the way people usually looked at him, cataloging his face against a mental archive of images, but the way you look at someone you've just collided with, taking measure of whether they're going to be a problem or not. "It's fine," she said again, and this time she seemed to mean it. "Watch where you're going." And she walked away. Junseo stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment, holding his coffee in one hand, and realized he was smiling. He couldn't remember the last time he had smiled without knowing someone was watching. Mara Whitfield was 33 years old, and she had, by her own assessment, a completely reasonable life. She had grown up in Brooklyn, the youngest of 3 children, in a household that ran on warmth, laughter, and the particular kind of organized chaos that comes from 2 working parents and too many opinions at the dinner table. She had her mother's gift for making people feel at ease and her father's deep suspicion of anything that couldn't be laughed at. She had studied social work at Hunter College and spent 4 years doing case management for a nonprofit on the Lower East Side, before burning out in the specific way that people who care too much always do. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly, like a candle that simply runs out of wax. She had taken a year, regrouped, and pivoted into community programming. Now she ran after-school programs for a youth center on the Upper West Side, 2 blocks from where. On this Tuesday in October 2024, a stranger with a baseball cap had walked directly into her morning. She arrived at the center still damp, greeted the front desk with a wave, made herself tea in the staff kitchen, and had entirely forgotten the collision by the time her 9 o'clock meeting started. This was one of Mara's qualities that the people who loved her found both admirable and slightly maddening. She did not dwell. She processed quickly, released cleanly, and moved forward. Her best friend Denise called it a superpower. Her last ex-boyfriend called it avoidance. Mara thought the truth was somewhere between the two, and that most truths were. She did not Google the man from the sidewalk. She did not think about him again until Wednesday, when he walked into the youth center. She was in the gym, supervising the tail end of a basketball session, when Kenji, 16, 6 feet tall, and constitutionally incapable of walking anywhere quietly, erupted through the side door with the specific energy of someone carrying news he considered urgent. "Mara." There's a guy at the front desk asking about volunteering. Tell Marcus to give him the form. He's Korean. Mara looked up from the clipboard. Kenji, that is not relevant information. I know. I'm just saying. He doesn't look like a volunteer. What does a volunteer look like? Kenji considered this. Not like that. Mara set down the clipboard and walked to the front desk. The man standing at the reception counter had his back to her. Dark coat. Baseball cap. Posture of someone who was used to waiting without showing that waiting cost him anything. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and she recognized him immediately. Not from any photograph or screen, but from the sidewalk. The rain. The cracked phone screen. You, she said, and she did not mean it unkindly, only factually. Something moved in his expression. Surprise, and then, quickly, something that looked almost like relief. Me, he confirmed. I wanted to apologize properly. For yesterday. And your phone. He held up a small paper bag. Inside, she would discover, was a phone screen repair kit, the professional kind, and a gift card to a repair shop 4 blocks away. I wasn't sure which you'd prefer. Mara looked at the bag for a moment. Then she looked at him. That's, she said, surprisingly thoughtful for someone who walks into people without looking. I'm working on the looking. Good. She took the bag. You said you wanted to volunteer. A pause. He seemed to be deciding something. If that's possible. Do you have experience with kids? I was one once. Everyone was once, Mara said. That doesn't automatically qualify you. He didn't flinch. I know. I learn fast, though. She studied him for a moment with the frank, unhurried assessment she applied to everything. Grant proposals, new staff, the structural integrity of the gym bleachers, and apparently, strangers who walked into her sidewalk and then followed her to work. What's your name? She asked. Another fraction of a pause. Jun. Mara, she said, and extended her hand. They shook. His grip was firm without trying to prove anything, which was, in her experience, a reasonably good sign. Fill out the form, she said, turning back toward the gym. Background check takes a week. Come back Thursday, and we'll see what you can do. He said thank you. She was already walking away. She did not Google him that night. She almost did. She opened the tab, typed JUN, and then closed the laptop. If he was going to be around the kids, the background check would tell her what she needed to know. And if he wasn't, then he was just a man who had walked into her morning twice and had, at least, the decency to bring a phone repair kit. That was enough for now. Junseo had not, in 12 years, filled out a form that asked for his real name, his address, and whether he had any prior convictions. He used his legal name, not the stage name the agency had given him at 19, not the name that appeared on billboard campaigns and streaming platforms and the back of tour merchandise. His real name, the one his mother had given him, the one that felt, when he wrote it, like putting on clothes he'd left in a drawer for a decade and finding they still fit. He came back Thursday. The background check came back clean the following week, which Mara had expected, though she would not have said so out loud. She sent him a text, 2 words, come Tuesday. He showed up 10 minutes early. The center was called Upward, which he found both earnest and accurate. The building itself had the quality of a place that had been cared for by a succession of people who actually meant it. The walls had been repainted recently. The bulletin boards were full. The basketball court had a scoreboard someone had clearly built by hand. Mara put him with the homework help program, which ran Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for kids between 10 and 15. She introduced him to the group without ceremony. This is Jun. He's going to help out for a while. And the kids received this information with the particular wariness of young people who had learned to be unimpressed by adults until proven otherwise. He was fine with that. He had grown up being evaluated. He sat down at a table with a 10-year-old named Destiny, who was having a conflict with long division that had taken on the quality of a personal grudge, and he worked through it with her slowly, from the beginning, until the problem that had seemed impossible resolved itself into something she understood. "You're patient," Destiny told him, which was the first unsolicited positive assessment he had received from anyone in longer than he could pinpoint. "I had a lot of practice," he said, which was true in a way he couldn't explain to a 10-year-old. Mara was across the room, working with a group of older kids on a project that involved poster boards and what appeared to be a significant quantity of markers. She was laughing at something one of them had said, her whole face open, the laugh completely unguarded, and Junseo looked over and then looked away because it felt, somehow, like intruding. He had been around a great many beautiful things in his career. Beautiful stages, beautiful cities, beautiful people arranged carefully for maximum effect. This was different. This was someone who did not know, or did not care, that they were beautiful. The distinction, he was finding, was enormous. After the session, when the kids had gone and the staff was cleaning up, Mara came to his table and sat down across from him. "Destiny said you were patient," she said. "She doesn't say that about people. She told me. She also said you have good handwriting." "I do." "She's 9. She doesn't care about handwriting. You must have made an impression." She tilted her head. "What do you do?" "When you're not wandering the Upper West Side and walking into people." The question landed in the particular way that simple questions do when you have spent 12 years training yourself to deflect them. "Music," he said, which was true and limited, and, he judged, sufficient. "Playing or making?" "Both, mostly performing." "Are you good?" He thought about this. "People seem to think so." Mara looked at him with the expression she seemed to reserve for statements that told her less than they appeared to. "That's a very careful answer. It's a complicated question. Whether you're good at something. Whether the version of you that performs something is actually you." She was quiet for a moment, and he felt the familiar brace of having said something more honest than he intended, the old instinct to walk it back, to smooth it into something more manageable. He didn't. "That's a real answer," she said finally. "I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't planning it." She stood up, stacking chairs with efficient, practiced movements. "Same time Tuesday," she said. "If you're coming back." "I'm coming back," he said. She nodded once, the way you nod when you've filed a piece of information and will revisit it if it proves to be true. October moved forward the way October does in New York, in colors and cold fronts, and the particular quality of afternoon light that makes the city look, for a few weeks, like it is trying to be a painting of itself. Junseo came to Upward on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He came reliably, on time, and without drama. He learned the names of the kids quickly, and remembered details. Marcus was working toward a basketball scholarship. Aaliyah was writing a graphic novel that she kept in a sketchbook she didn't let anyone see. Deshaun was funny in the way that kids are funny when they are also sad, which is to say he was very funny, and you had to pay attention to the edges. He was good at paying attention to edges. He and Mara developed the easy, unspoken shorthand of people who work in the same space and have established, without discussing it, that they find each other reasonable. She made tea in the staff kitchen at 4 o'clock every day. She started making 2 cups without asking. He was better at logistics than anyone had expected. He could move furniture, set up equipment, and navigate the particular chaos of 16 kids with competing noise levels with a calm that the other staff noticed and appreciated. "Where did you come from?" The assistant director, a warm, forthright woman named Claudette, asked him once. "A soul, originally. I mean, spiritually." "That's a harder question." She laughed and pointed at him, the way people point when they recognize something they can't quite name. He and Mara ate lunch together 3 times in the second week, which became 4 times in the third. They talked about the kids, about the programs, about the way the city changed with the season. She told him about growing up in Brooklyn, about her parents, about the particular grammar of a large family where everyone speaks at once, and the loudest person isn't necessarily the one with something to say. He listened with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had spent years giving performances in front of thousands and had never, in any of them, felt as present as he did sitting across a table from this woman, watching her talk about something that mattered to her. He told her things too, not the curated things, the press-approved backstory, but actual things. That he had left Korea for the first time at 19 and spent 3 years in practice rooms, learning to be something the industry needed, and that during that time he had misplaced something he was still looking for. That he had grown up with a grandmother who made soup on Sunday mornings and sang while she cooked, and that the thing he missed most about home, most consistently, was the sound of that. That he was afraid, sometimes, that the person he had trained himself to be had become more real than the person he had started as. She listened the way she did everything, completely. "Do you think those things can't coexist?" she asked. "The trained version and the original." "I don't know. Can they?" "I think they can," she said. "I think we're all trained versions of something. The question is whether the training was worth it." "Was yours?" She thought about it, genuinely, the way she thought about everything. "Yes," she said, "with some edits." He wanted to ask what the edits were. He wanted to know everything about her edits. He was beginning to understand, slowly and with some alarm, that he wanted to know everything about her in general, which was a feeling he had not had in long enough that he had wondered, at some point, whether he was still capable of it. He was, apparently, still capable of it. There was a night in the 3rd week of October that almost became something else entirely. It started with Deshawn. He was 15 and the sharpest kid in the room, which was saying something in a room that contained several sharp kids. And on that particular Thursday, he had come into the center wearing the specific expression of someone who had decided they were not going to feel anything about what had happened to them. Mara recognized the expression. She had worn it herself, at 15 and at 22, and a handful of times since. She got the story from Claudette in fragments over the course of the afternoon. Deshawn's older brother, who had been the person he measured everything against, had been arrested the night before. The charge was serious. The situation was bad, and Deshawn had come to the center anyway, because sometimes you keep going to the one place that feels solid when everything else is shifting. Mara watched him from across the room and felt the familiar ache of the work, the part of it that no grant application mentioned, the part that cost you something you could not invoice for. She went over at 4 o'clock and sat next to him and didn't say anything for a while, which was the right thing to do, and he leaned his shoulder against hers by small degrees until the weight was there, which told her what she needed to know. Junseo saw it from across the room. He did not interfere because he had enough sense to understand when presence was enough. But when Deshawn eventually got up to rejoin the group, the particular resilience of 15, the way it bends and straightens, Junseo came and sat in the chair the boy had vacated. "Is he okay?" he asked quietly. "He will be," Mara said, which was the honest answer. Not that everything was fine, but that the person would be. "You're good at that," Junseo said. "At what?" "Knowing the difference between what someone needs to hear and what's actually true, and making them the same thing." Mara looked at him. She thought about that for a moment. "You're good at things too," she said. "You've been watching him for 3 weeks without making it obvious. He knows you're paying attention. That matters more than you think." They were sitting close in the way that people sit when the room requires it, and neither of them moved to increase the distance. Outside, it was raining again. New York in October could not seem to stop raining, as though the city had decided to have an extended emotional moment, and the sound of it against the gym windows was steady and low. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. The reason you left the case management work, the burnout. Was there a specific moment, or was it?" "There was a specific moment," she said. "But that's not a story I tell in gyms." "Okay, ask me somewhere else." The sentence landed between them and sat there. He looked at her sideways, the small, careful look of someone deciding whether something means what it sounds like it means. "Somewhere else," he said. "Yeah. When?" "Friday's not a program day," she said. and looked away in a way that was not really looking away. He said, "Friday works for me." They did not look at each other after that. The session ended. The kids went home. The rain kept coming down, and Mara drove home with the particular feeling of having said something true that she could not unsay, which was terrifying, and, underneath that, something she did not yet have a name for. Friday they walked along Riverside Park in weather that had committed to being difficult and was not apologizing for it. She told him about the moment. A family she had worked with for 2 years. A child she had believed was going to be okay. A Thursday afternoon when everything was not okay. And the drive home afterward when she had pulled over and sat in her car for 45 minutes because she didn't trust herself to drive. Not because she was going to do anything reckless, because she was running on empty in a way that scared her. And she was old enough to know that scared feeling was information. "I took 6 months," she said. "I went to my parents' house in Brooklyn and slept for approximately 3 weeks, and then I started figuring out how to do this differently. And upward is differently. Upward is differently. I get to build something, not just manage the fallout. And I get to be in the room while they're still okay. That part matters to me." He walked beside her and said nothing for a moment, because sometimes the right response to a true thing is not another thing, but just the space to let it be true. "Thank you for telling me that," he said eventually. "I don't usually... I know." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you told me it wasn't a Jim story. So it's a story with conditions. And you gave me the conditions." He paused. "I don't take that lightly." She stopped walking. He stopped too, and turned toward her. And they were standing on the path with the river behind him and the city behind her. And the rain had finally, temporarily, stopped. And then she smiled. Not the full open smile, but the smaller one. The one she seemed to reserve for things she hadn't quite decided how to hold yet, and started walking again. He walked beside her. The river ran alongside them both. The city went about its business. And something shifted, quietly, in the architecture of what they were to each other. Not yet named, but real. The way things are real before they have words. It happened on a Friday in the 3rd week of October, and it did not happen slowly. Mara was at her desk when Kenji dropped a phone in front of her, screen up, with the urgency of someone delivering important intelligence. On the screen was a photograph, taken from a distance, slightly blurred, clearly unauthorized, of a man in a dark coat and a baseball cap walking along a street that was recognizably within several blocks of the center. The caption read, in Korean and English, "Is this Jun Seo Im spotted in NYC? He's supposed to be on hiatus and had been shared, at last count, 47,000 times." Mara looked at the photograph. She looked at Kenji. She looked at the photograph again. "That's Jun," she said. "That," Kenji said, with the gravity of someone who felt this moment deserved gravity, "is Jun Seo Im. From Eclipse. He's like one of the biggest K-pop idols in the world." Mara was quiet. "Eclipse," Kenji repeated, in case the name needed additional emphasis. "They've sold out the Tokyo Dome. They've sold out Wembley. He's been on the cover of like every magazine. There's a museum exhibit in Seoul about their choreography." Mara picked up the phone and looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she handed it back. "Does he know you know?" she asked. "I haven't said anything." "Keep it that way." She went back to her computer. "And don't share that post." Kenji lingered. "Are you going to say something to him?" "Yes," Mara said. "Eventually. But not right away." She went home that night and, for the first time, Googled his name. She spent 2 hours reading. Not because she needed to. She had already formed an opinion of Jun Seo Im that had nothing to do with stadiums and magazine covers, but because she felt, obscurely, that she owed it to the full picture of who he was. She found interviews in which he was careful, measured, professionally warm. She found concert footage in which he was something else entirely, not careful at all. but open in the way that performers are open when the performance itself becomes a form of honesty. She found a single interview, older, from 5 years ago, where he had been asked what he did when he was alone, and he had said, after a pause, "I try to remember what that feels like." She closed the laptop. She thought about the man who had crouched on a wet sidewalk to pick up her keys, the man who remembered that destiny preferred to be told what she got right before she was told what she got wrong, the man who talked about his grandmother's soup with a quiet grief that he seemed only half aware of. She thought about how he had told her his name was Jun, which was true, and not the whole truth. She was angry about that, a little, and she understood it, a little, and she didn't know yet which of those feelings was going to win. She pulled back. She didn't do it dramatically. Mara was not a dramatic person, had in fact spent considerable energy over the years making herself the opposite of dramatic, because she had watched drama consume people she loved and found it generally not worth the cost. She did it quietly. She was slightly busier when he arrived. The extra cup of tea appeared less reliably. The lunches became shorter, or moved to the desk, or didn't happen at all. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He was someone who had spent 12 years in an industry that required him to read rooms, read audiences, read the precise temperature of every space he entered. He was very good at noticing. He didn't push. He gave her the distance she was putting between them with the careful courtesy of someone who understood, at least in principle, that people were entitled to change their minds about things, about people. But it cost him. He was honest enough with himself to admit that. It cost him in a way that surprised him with its precision, not the general ache of loneliness he had carried for years, but something more specific. The absence of her, in particular. The way the Tuesday sessions felt longer now. The way he kept almost saying things and stopping. He was a week from having to make a decision about Korea. His manager had called twice. The label had called once. There was a project, a large one, a return, the kind that would matter to the group and to the people who had waited through the hiatus. He had told himself he'd decide when he'd had enough time to breathe. He had been breathing for 5 weeks. He didn't know if it was enough. He didn't know a lot of things. On a Thursday afternoon, after the kids had gone, he found Mara in the gym arranging chairs for an evening event. He picked up the other end of a row without asking, and they worked their way through the setup in silence before she said, without looking at him, "I know who you are." A beat. "I know," he said. She looked up then. "You knew I knew. I suspected, a week ago, maybe more. And you didn't say anything. Neither did you." She set down a chair, turned to face him directly. This was the thing about Mara. She did not have conversations sideways. When she decided to have the conversation, she had it. "Why didn't you tell me? From the beginning?" "Because I wanted..." He stopped. Started again. "Because for the first time in 12 years I was somewhere where I was just a person. And you were the first person who made me feel like that. And I didn't want to ruin it." The room was quiet. "I'm not a fan," she said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. I didn't know who you were. And now that I do, I don't know how to..." She paused. "I don't know how to know that the person you've been here is real. Because you're trained to be likable. You're trained to be compelling. That's your job." "It is," he said. "But I don't know how to train someone to want to hear about my grandmother's soup. That part I didn't plan." She looked at him for a long moment. "I need some time," she said. "Okay. That doesn't mean..." "I know," he said. "Take the time." He went home and sat in the cellist's reading chair and did not call his manager back. Denise Okafor had been Mara's best friend since freshman orientation at Hunter, a friendship that had survived bad apartments, worse relationships, 2 cross-borough moves, and the period when Mara had briefly considered becoming a life coach, which Denise had talked her out of with characteristic directness. She arrived at Mara's apartment on Saturday with wine and the particular expression she wore when she had already formed an opinion and was waiting to be asked for it. "Tell me everything," she said, and she settled onto the couch with the posture of someone who intended to be there for a while. Mara told her everything. Denise listened. She was, when she wanted to be, an exceptional listener. It was one of the qualities that made her very good at her job as a therapist and occasionally exhausting as a friend, because she listened the way therapists do, which meant you couldn't get away with saying things you didn't mean. When Mara finished, Denise swirled her wine. "Okay," she said. "Let me reflect back what I'm hearing. You met a man. You liked him. You found out he's famous. Now you're avoiding him because you're afraid that the person you liked was a performance. In essence. And the evidence for this theory is..." Mara opened her mouth, closed it. "Because from everything you've described," Denise continued, "what he showed you here, the patience with the kids, the honesty about being lost, the soup story, the fact that he physically came back to apologize for your phone with a repair kit, that's not a performance. A performance is what gets you on a magazine cover. That's just a person. You can't know that." "You can't know anything," Denise said. "That's the whole deal with other people. You never know. You decide whether the risk is worth it. It's not a normal situation. No relationship is a normal situation. You know that. You've counseled enough kids in complicated situations to know that normal is a budget airline. Everyone thinks they're on it. Nobody actually is." Mara laughed despite herself. "He told you he was in music," Denise said. "He told you the performance version of himself might not be real. He said that to you before you knew who he was. That's not a curated confession. That's a person trying to tell you something true in the only language they have available." Mara was quiet for a moment. "He's going back to Korea," she said. "Eventually. His whole life is there. His whole life is there now. Life moves." "You're being very breezy about this." "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." Denise refilled both glasses. "You know what I think? I think you like him more than you've liked anyone in a long time, and that scares you, and you found a reason that sounds principled to back away." "That's an extremely therapist thing to say." "I am an extremely therapist." Mara looked at the ceiling. "What if I'm wrong about him?" "Then you're wrong about him, and you deal with that. But Mara..." Denise leaned forward. "What if you're right?" The call came on a Monday. Jun Seo was in the apartment, at the window, doing what he had been doing most mornings for the past week, thinking in circles without arriving anywhere useful. His manager, Dai Jung, who had known him since he was 19, and had the patience of someone who has shepherded talent for long enough to understand that sometimes talent needed to be left alone to find its way back, had given him space. But space had limits. The offer was from Nova Entertainment, the largest production company in Korea, the kind of project that comes once in a career if you're fortunate. A live concert film, a full comeback album, a world tour beginning in March. The kind of thing that, a year ago, Jun Seo would have approached as inevitability. Of course. What else would he do? Now he sat with the phone in his hand and felt the familiar weight of everything that yes implied. Not that yes was wrong. The music was real. It had always been the realest part. The part that predated the industry and would, he hoped, outlast it. The members of Eclipse, the 3 other men he had grown up alongside, had shared the particular grammar of that life with, were real. The work was real. But so was this. So was October in New York. So was the woman who made 2 cups of tea and sometimes forgot. And so was Destiny and her long division. And so was the cellist's reading chair by the window where he had, for the first time in years, recognized himself. Dae-jung said, "They need an answer by Friday." "I know." "Jun Seo." A pause. "You sound different." "Different how?" "I don't know yet. Better, maybe. Or more complicated. Sometimes those are the same thing." He ended the call and sat for a while. Then he got his coat and walked to Upward. He was not scheduled on Mondays. Mara's car was in front of the building. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the same sidewalk where he had stood 3 weeks ago in the rain. A different person, or maybe the same person but farther along in remembering who that was. He went inside. Mara was in the gym, alone, doing exactly what she always did when she was thinking something through, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. She was stacking mats against the wall with the particular energy of someone in conversation with herself. She heard him come in and turned. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the mat she was stacking. "I got a call from Seoul," he said. "I figured you would. I have until Friday." She set down the mat and turned. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet. That's honest. I know it is." She leaned against the stack of mats. Jun Seo. First time she had used his full name, he felt it. "Yeah. I owe you an apology. I pulled back and I didn't explain it, and that wasn't fair. You were honest with me and I wasn't honest back, and that's..." She paused. "And that's not how I want to be. You don't owe me anything." "I do, though. Because the reason I pulled back wasn't really about whether you're a performance. I know you're not." She looked at him directly, and there was nothing performed about how she was doing it. "The reason I pulled back is that I like you, and liking you feels complicated, and I'm better at complicated when I can manage the variables. And I'm not a manageable variable. You are famously not. No." A ghost of a smile. "I know," he said. "I'm not. I don't want to promise you things that aren't mine to promise right now. I don't know what Friday looks like, let alone March. I'm not asking for promises. What are you asking for?" She thought about it. "Well, I think I'm asking for the rest of this week, whatever it looks like. And then we see." He looked at her. The woman who made 2 cups of tea and walked away from sidewalk collisions with principled irritation and laughed with her whole face. And felt something settle in him that had been moving for a long time. "The rest of this week," he said, "and then we see." Tuesday they had lunch at the place on Amsterdam that Mara liked. The one with the soup that she claimed was the best in the neighborhood. And he said that was a strong claim. And she said strong claims required strong soup. And he tasted it and said, after a moment, that it wasn't as good as his grandmother's. And she said that was unfair, because he had been invoking his grandmother's cooking as a benchmark for months, and she had no way to verify the claim. "Come to Seoul," he said. "She'll make it for you." He had not planned to say that. It was out before he could stop it. Mara looked at her soup, then at him, then back at her soup. "That's," she said carefully, "a large offer." "I know." He didn't walk it back. "I'll think about it." "Okay." She thought about it for the rest of lunch. He could tell because she got quieter in the particular way she got quiet when she was processing something, not withdrawn but focused. Like the rest of her attention had been temporarily reassigned. Wednesday he brought her coffee from the place he had found on his second morning in the city. The one that did the Ethiopian pour-over, which she had once mentioned, in passing. That she missed the old version of. He had found the old version. She looked at the cup for a moment before she took it. "How did you remember that?" "I remember everything you say." She looked at him. "That's a lot of pressure." "It's not meant to be." He thought about how to explain it. "It's just, when someone talks, there's usually a layer you hear and a layer you don't. I tend to hear both." "Is that a trained thing or a you thing?" "Both," he said. "This one is mostly a you thing." She took the coffee. She didn't say anything else, but she was smiling. The real smile. The one that got into her eyes. And he committed it to the same part of him where he kept things he wasn't sure he would get to keep. Thursday was the last day before his deadline, and they both knew it without saying so. The session went long. Deshawn's graphic novel project had hit a narrative wall and required a group consultation, which involved more opinions than a single wall should require, and by the time the center cleared out, it was past 7. Mara was at her desk. Jun Seo was in the doorway, coat on. "Have you decided?" she asked, not looking up from what she was writing. "Yes." She looked up. "I'm going back," he said. "I'm going to say yes." A beat. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already reasoned through. When? 2 weeks. Okay. She went back to writing, then stopped. Junseo. Yeah. Good. I mean that. Go make the music. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Mara. Yeah. I don't want to say goodbye. She put her pen down. She looked at him with the full, direct regard that he had come to understand was her highest form of attention. Then don't, she said. He almost asked what she meant. He didn't. He let it sit there between them, the way some things need to sit before they become clear. Good night, he said. Good night, Junseo. She told herself she was not going to the airport. She told herself this on the morning of his departure, which was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after their Thursday goodbye. She told herself this while she made her tea. She told herself this while she stood in the shower. She told herself this while she looked at the text he had sent the night before. Flight leaves at 11. Thank you for October. It gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. She had written back. Safe travels. Make something good. She had stared at that response for a long time before sending it. It was true and insufficient, and exactly what someone says when they are trying to be sensible about something that does not feel sensible. She called Denise at 7:30. I'm not going to the airport, she said. Okay, said Denise, who was clearly still half asleep. Because that would be the kind of thing that happens in movies, and real life is not a movie, and I don't do that kind of thing. And it wouldn't change anything logistically, and Mara, what? What time does his flight leave? 11. A pause. What time is it now? 7:42. JFK or Newark? JFK. Take the A train, Denise said. You have time. Mara stood in her kitchen, holding her phone. This is insane, she said. Probably, Denise agreed. Go. She thought, on the train, about all the sensible reasons she should have stayed home. She thought about the 12 years between them. Not in age, but in kind of life. The life he had lived, the scale of it, the complexity of it, and the version of her life that had fit neatly into a building on the Upper West Side and knew everyone by name. She thought about distance and schedules, and the particular difficulty of loving someone whose face appeared on billboards in cities you'd never visited. She thought about his grandmother's soup. She thought about the way he listened to things. Both layers. She thought about the reading chair by the window, and the man who had sat in it for 3 days trying to remember how to breathe. The train moved through Brooklyn, through Queens, and she sat with her hands in her lap and thought about what Denise had said. What if you're right? She found him at the International Departures Terminal with 40 minutes to spare, which was, she would later reflect, either very good planning or the universe being uncharacteristically cooperative. He was alone. She had half expected an entourage, and then remembered that he had spent 6 weeks being just a person, and apparently that practice had carried. And he was standing at a coffee cart with his bag at his feet, looking at his phone with the expression of someone who is looking at their phone because they don't know what else to do with their hands. He looked up when she approached, and his expression went through several things very quickly. Surprise, and then something more complicated, and then something that settled into the kind of quiet that isn't quiet at all but is the opposite of quiet, contained under pressure. You came, he said. Don't make it weird, she said. I'm here, that's all. I'm here. He looked at her for a moment, and then he laughed, the real laugh, the one she had heard the first time on the wet sidewalk, the one that had nothing calculated in it. Okay, he said. They stood for a moment with the airport moving around them, the particular white noise of departures, everyone going somewhere. I meant it, she said. About Seoul. If the offer is it's still open. I can't promise when. I know. And I'm not making promises either. I'm just saying that I don't want this to be... She paused. I don't want this to be a thing that happened in October that we're both careful about. I don't want that either. So we don't do that. We don't do that, he agreed. He was looking at her with the attention she had come to understand was his deepest form of presence. Not watching, not performing watching, but actually there. All of it. I lied about my name, he said. In the beginning. I know. Jun is your name too. I wanted you to know I know it wasn't Jun Seo. She put her hand briefly on his arm. The way you touch someone when you want them to stop explaining and just be here. I know. I'm here anyway. He covered her hand with his for a moment. They stood like that for a while, in the middle of the departures terminal, while the airport moved around them, and none of it was a movie, and all of it was real. Call me when you land, she said. It'll be the middle of the night for you. I'll be awake. He picked up his bag. He looked at her one more time. Thank you for October, he said. Thank you for the repair kit, she said. And for the soup story. And for Destiny's long division. He smiled. He walked toward the gate. He did not look back, because she had not asked him to, and because they had agreed, without saying so, that this was not a goodbye. She watched him go. She stood there for a moment in the white noise of the terminal. Then she got back on the A train and went to work. The flight from New York to Seoul is 14 hours. Mara had never been on a plane for 14 hours before. She had a window seat, a book she didn't open, and a playlist she had made over the course of 4 months that she also, as it turned out, didn't listen to. Mostly she looked out at the dark over the Pacific and thought about how strange it was, the way things moved. Jun Seo had called when he landed in November, in the middle of Mara's night, and she had been awake, as promised. They had talked for an hour about nothing in particular, about his first days back, about the album taking shape, about a specific argument he'd had with a producer over a bridge in the third track that he'd eventually won, about the way her center had started a new reading program that was going well, about the soup. They had talked, after that, in the particular rhythm that long-distance relationships develop when they are tended carefully. Not every day, not forced, but consistently. The thread of it held. He had asked her, in January, to come for the album launch in March. She had thought about it for 3 days, which was, for Mara, a long time. She had said yes. Daejung met her at Incheon Airport, which she had not expected, holding a sign that said Whitfield in careful block letters. He was a small man with efficient movements and the expression of someone who had seen a great many things and found most of them explicable. He shook her hand. He talks about the center, he said, as they walked to the car, specifically about a girl named Destiny who doesn't let anyone help with her math. She's getting better, Mara said. And Deshawn too, the kid who was having a hard time when Jun was there. He came back the week after everything happened with his brother. He's been coming back ever since. That's the whole thing, really. You just have to keep coming back. She paused, a little surprised she'd said that much. Daejung nodded once, carefully, as though he recognized the point from somewhere else in his life. He's better too, Daejung said, and said it in a way that suggested it was meant for her to understand something about causality. Seoul in March was cold and bright, and larger than she had imagined, which was saying something because she had imagined it extensively. Jun Seo met her at the hotel. Not the massive industry hotel where the label had a block of rooms, but a smaller place in a neighborhood that reminded her, a little eye, of the Upper West Side. And he was standing in the lobby when she came through the door. And they looked at each other for a moment across the lobby, the way you look at someone when the reality of them in a space you had only imagined them is still catching up to you. You came? He said, which was the same thing he had said in the departures terminal in October. Don't make it weird, she said, which was the same thing she had answered. He smiled. And then he closed the distance and put his arms around her, and she let herself be held in the lobby of a small hotel in Seoul. And it was nothing like a movie and everything like something real. She met his grandmother on Sunday. The apartment was warm and full of the smell of something cooking, and the woman who came to the kitchen doorway was small and direct and looked at Mara with the frank assessment of someone who had formed an opinion already and was checking it against the evidence. She made the soup, Junseo said. Mara sat down at the table. She tasted it. She understood, immediately, why he had been talking about it for months. Tell her, Mara said, that this is the best thing I have ever tasted. He translated. His grandmother listened. She looked at Mara for a moment. Then she said something in Korean that made Junseo go quiet for a second before he translated it. She says, he said, that it always tastes better when there's someone worth making it for. Mara looked at the bowl of soup. She looked at the man across the table from her. She thought about October rain and cracked phone screens, and a man in a baseball cap learning how to breathe again. She thought about 2 cups of tea and long division, and a departure terminal, and an A train. She thought about what it means to show up for something before you know what it's going to become. Tell her thank you, Mara said. He told her. His grandmother nodded once. Then she went back to the kitchen, because there was more to do, and some things speak for themselves. And that's the story of Mara and Junseo. A collision in the rain, 6 weeks in October, 14 hours across the Pacific, and the courage to show up, twice, for both of them, before the outcome was guaranteed. If this story moved you, hit the like button. It means more than you know. Subscribe if you're not already here, so you never miss a Wisdom original. And in the comments, we want to know, have you ever taken a chance on someone before you knew how the story ended? Tell us, we're listening.